Good evening, friends, and welcome to another episode of Tim Kirby Russia. You know him, you love him, Matt Ehret, the ultimate patriot of Canada and the ultimate historian of Canada as well, which is even more important, is here with us today. I have been pestering Matt to ask him about this sort of issue with Trump and the annexation of Canada ever since I first heard about it, but Matt's been a little bit busy. So finally, I got him kind of here on the line. And Matt, I want to ask you about this from the standpoint of when I heard about this, I thought first about you, because it was like Trump, it might be making a move against London. Because if you look at what Trump is doing, he's sort of throwing he's kind of like wanting to push all the globalists into Europe and then push them off a cliff. That seems to be kind of what he's doing with some of his moves here. So do you think that there's any real probability of this happening? Do you think that Trump actually might be working against London? And do you still believe that Canada has been this mechanism of influence against the United States from London?
Great set of questions. I'll start with the Canada one first. In my research, and I do run the Canadian Patriot magazine, but at the same measure, I had to acknowledge the realities that my research took me through, which is that Canada has never been a real country. It's not a thing. There's not, like, we talk about it as if it were, but it isn't. The actual control mechanisms that define the internal, domestic, and foreign policy of Canada have the vast majority of our country's existence been located in the city of London, and the control mechanisms of the British Empire more generally, which, by the way, did not disappear after World War II, contrary to popular mythologizing, which has prescribed this idea that the British Empire just gave up. They voluntarily just gave up their empire claimants, and now they became a clean, liberty-loving Commonwealth, liberty-loving Commonwealth, and now it's the American Empire that picked up the slack of hegemony, and that's a partial truth, but mostly a lie. The empire never gave up, and in fact, their assets that have always been there since 1776 that you and I went through.
We've talked about that before. So for those who might be new here, you're going to have to go back into my archive. Look for Tim Kirby Russia and also Matt Ehret. I'm sure you'll find a lot of videos. But anyways, going on.
Yeah. But all that to say, this deep state thing that's been baking itself inside of the United States, turning the U.S. into an appendage of the British Empire, especially over the dead body of William McKinley in 1901, and that really took hold after FDR was I would say killed. No autopsy, so no one can fucking tell me otherwise. But at that point,
Stalin's death in Russia is also considered. It's become a mystery. It used to be one of those sort of lock solid things. He was old, he got sick. Now everyone's like, we don't know how he died. Mysterious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, was the doctors? Was it maybe?
Who knows?
With FDR, I don't know, but all I know is very convenient timing of his death, and certainly his enemies in the Fabian Society and Chatham House, the otherwise known as the Council on Foreign Relations, took full control under Truman, established the Truman Doctrine, got rid of U.S. Whatever patriots were there in U.S. intelligence under the OSS were totally destroyed. They were labeled red commies, and the only vetted agents were allowed to be a part of the CIA under this Anglo-American special relationship, and blah, blah, blah. We know the story. They killed JFK. So now we're at a place 80 years later, living in the wake of these devastatingly bad downshifts in human civilization. And there might be a sign of life revived around the figure of Trump, who has made some interesting disruptive maneuvers, which he couldn't do by himself. He would need to have some military intelligence support in order to make this happen. I don't believe in QAnon. I think that is a psyop. However, it does require some form of conspiracy to make something like that happen in the context of the level of oligarchical controls over the U.S. establishment that we know exist. So I hope that is legit. I hope it's not a controlled opposition. Otherwise, I'm going to be pissed. So operating under the
you're speaking about what specifically then? Trump's actual efforts to maybe make this kind of thing happen to bring Canada into the fold? I kind of missed that part of it.
Oh yeah, the awakening of a false patriotism amongst Canadians who are running ever more deeply into the embrace of the British Empire's
in that sense,
embrace to protect them from the historic specter of evil Americans out to take Canada, which has been sort of hypnotically baked into the Canadian psyche over well over 180 years. It's
Yeah.
like really wired into most of the Canadians, except for a few Albertans. But I've noticed that the danger is it's an easy trigger. The empire knows the psychological framework of Canadians pretty well, and they've played us against ourselves so many times.
Yeah.
Americans want to steal our water. They want to steal our stuff. They want to own Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Our identity is we are anti-American. That's who Canadians have been wired to believe we are. So the idea that now that we're seeing this fervent, super Canadian pseudo-nationalism revive, and that Mark Carney is definitely playing it like a bit of a snake charmer,
Mm-hmm.
is the question is that a byproduct that is a surprising byproduct of Trump's call to take control of Canada, or is that planned in advance before he even made that call? I don't know. My jury is out.
Mm-hmm.
I think Canada would be better if we broke free of the British Empire completely.
Yeah.
And I'm okay. I'm okay with the possibility of joining the United States if that's a better future than staying with the British Empire. But is the U.S.
Here's the question then. Why do you
Yeah.
say that? I kind of understand why, because we've talked a bunch of times about this, and I know a lot of historians and all that. But why, for your average person, why would Canada making the turn to Washington, which sounds weird, the pivot to Washington, be of benefit?
In the context of Washington truly reviving its authentic American nationalism, the type of which we had seen with John F. Kennedy and FDR and Lincoln and McKinley, if that were actually being revived, which is a pro-industrial spirit of that actualizes those ideals to a very solid degree of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, well, that type of that would make America an anti-imperial sovereign state fighting to work with other sovereign states for the betterment of their people. It would be very, very conducive to a pro-multipolar identity in the authentic sense of the word, the likes of which we see emerging with the Russia-China friendship, premised around large-scale, future-oriented projects. That type of America and that type of spirit would be something that could really assist Canada to find its true heritage as a society which is founded upon cherishing the inalienable rights of every individual, which we don't have in Canada. Canada has been principally a nation who have had rights given to us by a hereditary elite, by a crown. Contrary-wise, we could implicitly see those rights taken away, like we did with the trucker convoy or a number of other cases.
Yeah, that was a pretty glowing example of that.
That's one of many, right? And that could get even worse in times of even more crisis or state-sponsored crisis. So Canada, we're sort of the nation that didn't make it. America made the leap into becoming a republic, into becoming a sovereign country. Canada, we kind of at different moments tried to, but we're always tripped up and induced to re-embrace the warm, comforting sort of blanket or chain cage of the British monarchy as a whole.
Let me ask you then this kind of a quite important question, but a little bit of a different angle. So, if Trump at least is trying to do half of the things he says he's going to do, so we'll say he's at least 50% honest in his intentions or more, is London his enemy? Maybe his mortal enemy?
Well, I wrote an article on celebrating the destruction of this special relationship when Trump had kicked out the British ambassador, Lord Kim DeRoche, back in, 2019. And there was, I think, enough evidence that Trump has been confronted with that showcases that MI6, whether it's Christopher Steele as an MI6 operative or Sir Richard Dearlove, who was also a principal organizer behind Russiagate, I think he's had enough evidence to showcase that the British Empire is not truly an ally of him or the United States as a whole. It troubles me a little bit that he seems to think that there is something inside of England that is viable, and I'm not talking about the Brexit camp. I'm talking about the messaging that I've seen him put forward around King Charles, who perhaps he thinks is outside of the influence of this MI6 anti-American deep state of England, when he said, I love Prince Charles, or I love King Charles.
Yeah, I've seen that memes that for some reason he was really, really lovey-dovey with, or should say, King Charles. But why, again?
Yeah, exactly. Is it that he's naive and doesn't realize that King Charles is directly a leading self-aware operative of this global British Empire, or is he playing a game and just doing what Trump sometimes does, which is, play like, psyoping the enemy by saying nice words and actually doing other things. Again, I don't know. I know that if he said he wants to join, or he wants to accept Charles's offer to join as an affiliate member of the British Commonwealth. I think that would be a stupid idea. It's fine if he wants to play along with the language, but for me, if he goes ahead and actually does it, my actions mean more than anything for me, then that would definitely taint my view of his power of judgment and those influencing some of the more negative aspects of his foreign policy. That could indicate that he could fall in a trap. And I've been saying now for about, since I gave an interview, I think the day that Trump first announced that Canada should be the 51st state, looking at the fact that Mark Carney was already, it was decided even then that Carney was going to be the replacement of Trudeau, who was all used up. Carney represents the North American Union. His wife is the research director of the Canada 2020 think tank that installed Justin Trudeau, that's run by 7 privy councillors, 2 of whom, John Manley and Thomas Axworthy, were co-founders of the North American Union program to create a European Union modeled Amaro and system of centralized control of North America under a special Anglo-driven mechanism. It was put on the back burner back in 2008 when people were then not ready to give up their liberties. So we kind of forgot about it, but it's still on the agenda.
Well, then, so why did they want to then again, what's the connection? Because it seemed like Trump appeared and then we had to get rid of Trudeau. Why did Trudeau have to just vanish out of Canadian politics after all those years of being in power, while being hated throughout the entire period, from what I've seen?
Well, I think there's only so much. I mean, how much of that was directly Trump doing this hilarious bullying of Justin, which I enjoyed listening to. I really enjoyed that.
I'm sure every Canadian did, except for the weirdo freaks who support him. So 90% of Canadians probably loved it.
But he already had, I'd already been paying attention that back, I think about 9 months ago, there was already a movement inside of the Liberal Party circulating letters calling for Justin Trudeau's dismissal and replacement by somebody who's not hated by all of Canadians. So that had already been put into place already. And, I think that Mark Carney has been the desired technocrat governor overseer of Canada for a number of years. I think it was already decided even before COVID that Carney was going to be, probably even when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada back in 2008 to 13, it was probably decided even back then that the plans for him would be to run the ship of state, especially in a time of economic systemic breakdown, the likes of which we're currently living through. And we ain't seen nothing yet. It's about to get triggered.
Economic systemic breakdown. I mean, I haven't been to North America in a while, man. But what do you mean by that? I mean, the economy of, let's just say, the United States doesn't seem to be great, but there's, for America, a little bit of an uptick with Trump. He's trying to bring back industry. We'll see. Where's the crisis? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the global derivatives bubble, which is the time bomb that's been set. Yeah, so that's the time bomb that has taken control of the world economy, and it didn't even exist in 1982. Or 1987. There was $2 trillion of derivatives. Now there's at least 1.2 to 3.2 quadrillion dollars. People don't even know. Way more than the world GDP, and the physical productive potential of the U.S. has diminished dramatically year to year. So the powers of production have diminished, while the overall speculative assets have increased to the point now of, I think, a total disruptive breakdown. And depending on what happens with these, what is it, the Liberation Day of April 2nd, I don't really know, but the implementation of the tariffs against Canada, Mexico, the big tariffs against China, are going to be, I'm curious to see what they're going to do. Because I'm a fan of tariffs. I'm a big fan of tariffs. So
are the founding fathers. But anyways.
Yeah, that's the only time the U.S. has ever grown is through protective tariffs. But Steve Witkoff, who's a George Soros hedge fund former president and top manager of the Soros machinery, is not competent. He has no intellectual ability in my investigation of everything he's said and done to wield tariffs properly. He can do it I don't see any evidence that that's the case. You can threaten nations to try to give you their technology and to set up shop in your country, but that's not what tariffs were supposed to be ever. It was supposed to be to create a nascent industry with capabilities inside of your country.
It's your classic protectionism, which people say is
Classic
bad, which is
protectionism. Yeah.
retarded. You can even see with the United States. We took away all of our protections, and then you just watch American industry vanish. Without protectionism, essentially, it's like, although I wouldn't exactly say I'm a fan of his worldview, it's like what Professor Richard Wolff says, that just capitalism just goes wherever the cheapest labor is. So without protectionism, you know, all these factories are just going to hop to wherever life is horrifically poor.
So. Yeah, that's the formula right there. Yeah, exactly. Labor will always become cheaper and cheaper. Reach a breaking point when you can't, like, you know, milk a dead horse. At a certain point, things are going to break. So protectionism, but there's self-destructive protectionism too, which is when you just wield it for the sake of making income by looking at it mathematically. Like, if we tax these goods coming in, we can make money. You know, or we can use it as a weapon to punish countries that don't do what we want them to do.
That's a bit different. Yeah.
That's punitive tariffs. That's more. That's different. So the healthy kind is what Lincoln did. It's what McKinley did. It's what FDR did. And I don't see that understanding from the minds of those figures who are wielding that program today. So is the U.S. going to self-abuse and destroy even more the faith in the U.S. dollar if it does this full-blown tariff on April 2nd against Mexico, against Canada, already, you know, 100% tariffs on imports of a variety of goods, finished goods from China.
Why would that affect the U.S. dollar? If the United States becomes more powerful, doesn't that mean there will be more faith in the U.S. dollar? Or are you saying that would push Canada and Mexico to maybe consider other options of purchase?
Yes. Yeah, things like that. And you know, so that's my big concern, is that the Canada is currently under Carney, trying to enmesh itself ever more deeply into England, but also against with China. So I think that what we're going to be possibly seeing, or what they're trying to, because I don't treat Carney or Canada as a thing unto itself. I'm looking at all of this as an appendage of the British Empire, which is where the more sophisticated grand strategy, the dungeon masters, are located. And I think that there's going to be an effort, to try to, like, see, the problem that I have right now that I'm very disappointed with Trump is that while I applaud very much so his attack on a lot of the wokeism, the overbloated deep state bureaucracies that have like really held things back, and his support for peace with Russia on the Ukraine front, even though it's messy, I think that there's an honest intention there. I'm seeing more belligerence than I've ever seen towards the preparation for a war with China. I'm looking at all of the stuff that is being done in Taiwan, which is accelerating more separatism in Taiwan, turning it more into the Ukraine of the Pacific. I've got, you know, a certain effort with BlackRock by threatening to militarily invade Panama unless they sell off their ports and infrastructure to BlackRock instead of having them Chinese run. Now BlackRock, which is run by a Bilderberger steering committee member, is running, like, you know, all of these former Chinese ports, not just in Latin America, but also in other parts of the world, in Europe and beyond. So you got this whole transhumanist, dishonest Bilderberger thing that's trying to co-opt and influence the Trump policy, and with a focus on really weakening the Russia-China relation and push for a destruction of China specifically, which is not cool. I'd prefer to see the first term Trump paradigm, which did seem to be vectored, especially before COVID, around a U.S.-China-Russia friendship as a core, like, base of the world economy. That's what I need to see if I'm going to believe that this is solid, you know?
Well, yeah. Now, Matt, as someone being you, who really can talk a lot about what the global elite is thinking, and maybe even better than most people say who they are, do you think that perhaps Trump was sort of allowed to get into power because there's been a bit of an attitude shift? Maybe some of the elites are kind of like, you know what? Maybe the complete destruction of humanity through, you know, the LGBT dehumanization sort of thing, maybe we'll backtrack on that, and maybe we'll just kind of slow this train down, or maybe a certain faction within the globalists are like, maybe let's just tone this baby down and change the flavor of this, and we'll get what we want, kind of.
Yes, I do think that. I do tend to think that way. I sense that if Russia, China, and the multipolar alliance had not been as successful as they have been at thwarting a lot of the designs of a global restoration of a death cult feudalism, if they hadn't done what they've done so far and so been so successful at it, then I don't think it would have been possible for Trump to negotiate a victory in the United States. I don't think that decision could have happened without the consent of some very powerful factions among the more, I guess, self-aware representatives of the ruling oligarchy that kind of sees that blowing up the world in a nuclear holocaust is not in their monetary or
living in some bunker in Antarctica ain't gonna be too fun, especially according to
it
the
might be a
Fallout video game series.
Nice underground mansion. It might be super nice, 12-story underground mansion with all sort of amenities. But I think that while some might be willing to do that and see it as like a few generations of luxury, but I think that overall that is not a desirable outcome for at least some within the ruling class in the West. And I think that they're trying to sort of, put a new scenario in play and maybe live to fight another day, like they did in the case of.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah. They're looking for next season.
Yeah, they're like, exactly. They're looking at like the British Empire did when they put down their Hitler Frankenstein monster, and it's like, here's a good paradox for a lot of people who want to get a sense of the gist of how we're like this topic we're talking about. Is if the British Empire, the City of London, the Bank of England put so much effort into grooming and building up this Hitler fascist Frankenstein machinery from the 1920s onward, why is it that with all of that money and time and effort, including their American, aristocratic counterparts of the J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller Trust, all of those networks that were working together, why did they then go and abort and put down that fascist machine? And it's like there was a fight. There was a fight of factions. Yeah. The Nazi king, you had the Nazi prime minister, Neville Chamberlain, you had Oswald Mosley. Many of the British oligarchy said, no, let's keep going, even though he's not behaving the way we want him to. And even though we couldn't kill Franklin Roosevelt, even though they initiated several coups d'etats and murders that failed, they tried to undo the New Deal. So they were like, well, okay, let's just suck up our losses. Let's eat some humble pie. And there was a coup not a coup, but there was a put down where the Nazi king was kicked out. They gave him like a little story saying, I want to marry some American debutante. Oswald, whatever her name was, Jessica Simpson or something. Not Jessica Simpson.
No, that's a modern person. It doesn't matter, but we all know that story.
Doesn't matter. So that's the sort of thing I see today is sort of like, it doesn't mean that Churchill was good. He was a murdering genocidalist, but he was more committed to the endurance of the British Empire than he was to making compromises with something that could reduce the British Empire to a subsidiary junior partner in the New World Order.
Because that's the thing is one thing we're with a lot of people who maybe I would say, I don't know, watch my videos or comment on them at the very least, is a lot of people really don't understand that they believe in a hive mind. They're like, if there's this group of globalists, they all have to think the same thing. And I'm like, if you look at anything, any religion, any political movement, even if you look at sports, there's always these sort of like schools of thought, even within one thing. You know what I mean? Like if you look at American football, well, there's fans of the West Coast offense, as opposed to other theories of how to win at the same game. And so I think with the globalists, you can very well see that, because when Trump came into power, you've already seen a lot of these sort of like, like certain video game companies, movie companies have all sort of gotten rid of the DEI stuff. Let's just get rid of diversity, which makes me think that maybe they didn't really believe in this stuff very much, but they kind of felt like this is the way the trend is going. We're going to behave. We're going to do the cool stuff. Oh, this is gone. Fuck it. Like the emperor has no clothes on that one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfectly true. And I a lot of companies that made a lot of money out of the era of globalization, a lot of coal, oil burning, Chevron, a lot of these things. The executives, the people who have made their fortunes often doing bad things, supporting coups, playing along with the CIA, doing all these things, they kind of also could see that, okay, there's no place for us in this Green New Deal post-carbon age that these technocratic cultists seem obsessed with bringing into the world after some consorted, blowout of the financial system. There's no place for dirt. And even Mark Carney gave a speech at the Jackson Hole, Missouri Central Bankers Conference in 2019 on his thesis of 50 Shades of Green, with a direct reference to the 50 Shades of Gray.
Oh,
because it's
wow.
sadomasochistic. And yeah, and people can even read the transcript online. I cite it.
That's
he makes the point.
amazing. Sorry, I'm a huge fan of puns. Sorry, that made my day.
Yeah. I'm glad because it works on multiple levels.
Yeah, it does. That's a juicy pun steak right there. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because there's like a certain pleasure and pain, right? Like he, as the technocrat elite, are taking pleasure in watching the pain of austerity to save nature that is going to be imposed by this new system of values to decarbonize onto the system of humanity. And he makes the point that we're going to measure all companies in terms of, will they be allowed to have insurance? Will they be allowed to get a loan based upon how green they are on a scale of 1 to 50, 1 being brown, 50 being deep green, which will get you the in his mind, the best, rates on insurance, on other things. And he's like, those who make the shift now to the green ideology are going to benefit financially and handsomely, but those who fail to make the shift and stay brown will cease to exist. Yeah. And he's like threatening all of these executives who are billionaires, and I think that they heard that, and
they heard the threat, and they also see that they also see, which is pointed out all over the internet, that the Indians and the Russians and the Chinese aren't doing any of this crap. So he can make that threat, but he can't back it up. In fact, if they put their chips down on that sort of planning, they're probably actually more likely to lose in the long run against the rest of the world, sort of continuing on with whatever environmental policies it wants to have or not have. So
yeah, and China is absolutely, you could say, oh, they are doing green investments, and that's true. They are. They got a lot of windmills, especially a lot of solar panels, but at the same time, they're not stupid about it. And when they use solar panels, that energy, that electricity is entirely going towards their residential buildings. They don't use it for heavy industry. They're not stupid like us, where they recognize that you need coal, you need, carbon-based fuels, and especially nuclear. They're the world's leader of nuclear power.
Speaking of coal, it's like, well, why do the Chinese have electric cars? Is it to be cool, or is it because they produce a lot of energy by coal and they don't have a whole hell of a lot of gasoline? There you go.
Well, it's a very different process too, which is like they've got a whole different extraction process for their batteries than we're using. Not as destructive to nature. They can even get it out of ocean water. Mm-hmm. And that's like next generation technology that we're told doesn't even exist in the West, but that's what they're doing practically and commercially already to build their vehicles, which makes them way cheaper, way more. They can go, like, I think the last thing I saw was on average 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers on one full charge.
So there you go. That's amazing. Yeah. And why Russia is the opposite. And again, it's like practical reasons why Russia is the opposite. It's cold here, thus batteries work worse and last way less time, and gasoline is cheap, so why bother? And there you go. So a lot of these things are not so ideological as they are practical. But anyways, Matt, I know you have to go soon, so I guess wanted to ask then maybe some sort of closing thoughts on what you think the near future of Canada is going to be. Like, we're living in a crazy world, man. After Trump basically revealed all the documents related to USAID, essentially, when he put the USAID card down for the whole world to see, that's when I've become convinced that there's something more to him than just a lot of blowhard, nice-sounding rhetoric to get elected, in my opinion.
Yeah, me too. It gave me a sense that there's a bit of like substance behind the words, and it means a lot to do that. So as far as Canada, I don't see a lot of substance with Carney. I do see some interesting disruptions with Alberta. There does seem to be, the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, who's probably the closest thing to a human being with some political power that we have in any of the provinces, has given a list of demands to Carney to undo a lot of the carbon neutrality ideology that he's been pushing for years and years, and to allow for the development of pipelines, a variety of them, the opening up of Arctic resources that have been prevented for many years. So if those demands are not met, she's made the point that she will call a referendum, which could spark a whole secessionist discussion about becoming either its own, Alberta becoming its own country or joining the USA, or some very interesting disruptive reverberations.
This is the second time you've mentioned Alberta. Why is Alberta so special? Why is it different? Because of its position?
It's the Texas of Canada. So it's it's a very
Oh.
different culture and economy than any other part of Canada. It's very conservative, very, very tied to certain moral values that you don't see in most other parts of Canada. And because of their access to a lot of resources, especially oil and natural gas, they've got an economic clout that gives them the power to stand economically on their own 2 feet if they wanted to. And because of our constitution in Canada, that gives provinces the authority to have full control over how we use and develop our resources, which is not the case for most other countries outside of federal controls, as well as even, there's precedents where provinces can make foreign treaties with other governments outside of the authorization of Ottawa.
Certain places in Russia can do that too. But anyways,
well, that's so in the western part of the sort of transatlantic basket case community, that's still a pretty rare thing. And so I'm just seeing right now real momentum for some independence movements, maybe to join the USA, starting in Alberta. That would be cool.
Oh, feasibly. That's interesting. That's where it could all start.
It wouldn't happen in Ottawa. The control system is way too controlled there. Same thing for Quebec. That would happen later, but Alberta is the weak spot.
Well, is there any evidence that Trump has started some sort of like PR mechanism to kind of get this thing going, or like preemptively kind of get some referendums maybe launched or something like that?
Well, it's sort of playing into the hands of the British Empire so far from my vantage point. So it's, like I said, the only healthy response that I've seen use this in a constructive manner are certain very, very influential forces operational within Alberta. Other parts of Canada, I've just seen this activate this, again, like I said at the very beginning, this pro-British, fake Canadianism hysteria that now is the full evidence that America wants to steal us again, and we have to become more Canadian than ever. We have to have, double down on our maple leafs and our maple syrup and our hockey and saying sorry 18 times.
I got the real final question. Then what does Trump do to combat that line of reasoning? What's the counter to it?
Well, just being successful, like demonstrating, like that's been the case of the, you got to win, right? You got to demonstrate that if you miss this opportunity, you're going to be a loser and your life is going to be shit. And your kids' lives are going to be shittier because of you having screwed up. But look at us across this invisible sort of like boundary condition. These Americans' lives are improving. If Trump can actually really revive this American system of constitutional economic thinking with a foreign policy based upon cooperation in an authentic way, with other great powers that want to survive, like especially Russia and China, then that will show, I think, a lot of Canadians that there is a much brighter future that we're missing out on, that would then help shift the zeitgeist towards demanding a healthier foreign policy and internal policy. So I think that's the best thing, is just to win as a person, like be a successful person. Other people will want to emulate you. But if you threaten, like, if you take the approach of threatening Panama with military invasion unless they sell off all their infrastructure to BlackRock, well, that's not going to be the right way to do it. That's going to make the Panamanians already more hostile to you and more resentful to you, and it'll make BlackRock kind of more powerful, which is not your friend. So.
Leadership by example, a classic option. Anyways, Matt Ehret, thank you very much for being with us. Where can people find out about your work and subscribe to you and get more information and more videos?
Yeah, plugs. Yeah, please come. Okay, I'll take. CanadianPatriot.org is my main geopolitical website. RisingTideFoundation.net. Cultural economic warfare stuff is there. A lot of videos that we're putting out. We got a new video on Mark Carney. I don't know if you watched it. Each one is going to be about 6 minutes long. Episode 1 is out.
Actually, sorry, I missed that one.
Okay,
I'm a bad friend.
I'll send it to you after. Don't worry, I forgive you. But I'm doing a lot of these. So we're going to be doing like a series of 6 or 7 of these to just get across what is the British character that's been managing Canada. And Carney's a good like foil to introduce that. And the last thing I'll say is my Substack is my bread and butter. That's how I pay my bills. Substack. I do almost daily content. Some stuff is paid. And all my books, if you get a paid subscription, then people get all of the free PDFs of every book that I've written. And if they want to buy the books, then that's available on Amazon.
All right. Very good. Matt Ehret signing out.